Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Kordamt, and today we're going to be talking about Total War Shogun 2. This is a game that I've been playing recently and enjoying quite a bit, and the real motivation for me playing this game actually comes from playing a lot of Total War Warhammer 3, which is a game that I've played a lot of over, I want to say, the past 2 years, I believe, and I really enjoyed that game. I love Total War Warhammer 3. I even made a video talking about the game in the channel. I can leave a link up here in case you want to check it out. And something that I do mention in that game that I think is also important to mention here for some context is in regard to the Total War genre. So the Total War games are something that over time I always felt were gonna be just perfect for me based on my, my general preferences for games overall. But they never really clicked when I tried them, because I did try some Total War games over time. I just couldn't get into them. I couldn't understand the campaign gameplay, I didn't care at all for the diplomatic part of the game, and even the combat I couldn't get into because I was mostly accustomed to the more traditional style of RTS games, which at the time, we had Age of Empires, StarCraft, Warcraft 3, and many other RTS of the same style that came out around that time. And Total War does play very differently from those games. Eventually though, I did kind of force myself into giving it a proper try, and that happened with Total War Warhammer 3, because I'm also a big fan of the Warhammer universe. And as expected, once I started getting a hang of the game, I really started enjoying it very much. To the point where I can definitely say that Total War is a style of game, or is one of my favorite style of games nowadays to play. And with that said, I am now kind of on a quest to see what else I've been missing throughout the years. So I went online, I looked at reviews, I looked at which Total War games had come out. There are actually quite a lot of Total War games throughout the years. I believe they started around 2001, I believe, with Shogun 1, and ever since then there have been new Total War games, and they keep on coming out, which makes me very happy. Not knowing exactly which ones are considered to be good or bad, I looked at reviews, and it's very subjective. Some people are going to enjoy some Total Wars more than others, and vice versa, but I can definitely say that, generally speaking, I found a lot of people speaking very highly about Total War Shogun 2, Total War Medieval 2, as well as to, not in the same degree, but to some extent, Total War Attila as well. Given the time period in which Total War Shogun 2 takes place, which is 16th century Japan, plus the fact that it's set in Japan is something that appeals to me, I decided to start with Total War Shogun 2. So the purpose of this video is to just share my thoughts, speak a little bit about the game. You can consider this to be like a kind of like a brief review after spending some time playing Shogun 2. And my personal goal for trying out these Total War games has been, I am going to play the tutorials of each game to see, what they have, what's different, how the gameplay mechanics work, and then successfully complete a legendary campaign with any of the available factions. So in this case of Shogun 2, I did just that. I completed the tutorials which are played with the Chosokabe clan. You play the tutorials as the Chosokabe clan. And then I also completed a campaign on legendary difficulty with the Chosokabe clan. So given that these were the people we played with in the tutorial, plus the fact that the game defaults to this one when you start a new campaign, it also has an initial challenge of easy, which makes sense for a new player, and even the passive abilities of the clan appeal to me, because they buff ranged infantry. We have a reduced recruitment cost and upkeep for all bow infantry, and I do love playing with archers, and we can also recruit superior bow infantry. We even get some increased income from farms, which will also help out a little bit. So yeah, this was my main experience, tutorials plus legendary campaign with the Chosokabe clan, as well as a couple of failed attempts, of course, in legendary difficulty with battle realism, and the game mode was on a short campaign victory. You can have a short campaign victory, long, or domination, and the only thing this changes is how much time you have to complete your challenge, as well as the amount of provinces you have to capture in order to fulfill your victory conditions. So overall, it doesn't change much in terms of what you have to do, it's just more of it. And from my time spent playing Warhammer 3, what I do find in that game is that, especially with some factions, if the campaigns start becoming too long, they start dragging, it starts becoming a chore to capture more provinces and more settlements just because you need to hit a certain number. It can even become boring, and I don't want to reach that kind of state while playing the game. So I went for a short campaign victory, and I think it suited me quite well. With this, just before we get into the actual campaign, so I can show you guys what I did and all that, because I also want to go through like an overview of how the campaign went, because I do enjoy talking about the game, and I enjoy talking about, you know, how the campaign started, how we progressed, which problems we had, and how eventually we led it into victory. But I'm gonna leave that more towards the end of the video. I just want to mention before we start that, given that most of my experience is with Total War Warhammer 3, and I imagine a lot of new players came into Total War also because of the Warhammer games, I will be making some comparisons throughout the video between the two games. So let's begin. I guess I can just look over the start of the campaign. I will say right now that I really enjoy the artwork of this game as well as the music. I think it's very thematic, it's very beautiful. It's subjective, of course, but I do like it very, very much. I will skip over all of these things here. But yeah, so we have our campaign map over here. As you will see, it is smaller than what we have in Warhammer 3, of course. But I do find it to be a very enjoyable campaign map. I also think it's quite the beautiful campaign map. You know, again, graphics are what they are. I don't really consider graphics to be too important for doing some kind of review of a game, but I do think they give it a certain charm, and I do like the graphics quite a bit in this game. Something to mention as well is that if you've played another Total War game and you are now trying out Shogun 2, or if you have interest in trying out Shogun 2, it is an older game, but it still feels very familiar, you know? Maneuvering around the campaign map, looking at different settlements, having your armies, moving your armies, all those things seem very familiar. So, me coming from Total War Warhammer 3, which is one of the most recent ones, and going into Shogun 2, I did not have a lot of difficulty in maneuvering around the campaign map. Noticing that most of this is actually covered, man, even the Fog of War map is very pretty, I find. I'm actually just gonna jump into my campaign save, just because I think I can show more things as I go over what I want to talk about in the game. And I think the first thing I'm going to mention is comparisons. I'm going to make some comparisons between Shogun 2 and Total War Warhammer 3. So right now we have a lot more to see. This is the state of the campaign at its end. This is basically end game. I have successfully beaten the campaign at this point. Just so we have some notion, everything covered in black is my territory. Everything else is from other clans. And we see here that we have, you know, our campaign map with multiple settlements, like I was talking about. It feels familiar. Some settlements might have some unique buildings. You might have ports in some settlements. You might have some unique buildings such as a smithy or an armorer. You might have horse breeders. You may have gold mines, merchant colony, schools, etc., etc., which give these settlements some more strategic value, and they would be equivalent to what you have in Warhammer 3, which is like the landmark buildings in any given settlement. But yeah, I do like the map. I think it's a pretty map. I think maneuvering around this map is a fun experience. It's also quite different because we are playing on islands, which represent Japan, of course. And given the fact that we are playing in islands, it does have some more strategic elements to it. Like, this island is kind of cut off from every other island. Same thing about this island right here. You might have a single choke point where you can traverse by land. Everything else has to be done by ship. So that's also a fun aspect of playing in this map, and I quite enjoyed it quite a bit. But yeah, let's start by making some comparisons here between Total War Warhammer and Shogun 2. The first thing I want to mention, which might seem a bit obvious, but some people might not be aware of it, is that the Total War Warhammer games, so 1, 2, and 3, are actually the only fantasy Total War games that exist, to my knowledge at least. Every other Total War game is an historical game. It's based on a specific time period in the history of our world. So Shogun 2 is, takes place in 16th century Japan. It also has 2 expansions which play out in different time periods. The first one is the 12th century, and the second expansion is in the 19th century. And then you have other games like, for example, Medieval 2, Medieval and Medieval 2. You have Rome, you have Troy, you have Attila with all the Huns, you have Pharaoh, you have just a bunch of different games which all are historic. They take place in the real world in a specific time period. So it is a big difference in that sense. So in Warhammer you can play with, dwarfs, elves, demons, monsters, Skaven. You have magic in that world. You have supernatural powers, blah, blah, blah. In these games, like, in specifically in Shogun 2, you have none of that. You play with the human race. You're gonna have different armies, you're gonna have different units, but we're all talking about, just human armies and warfare between humans. And that is a big difference. I think there are some benefits and there are also some negatives about one or the other, and it really depends on what you feel like playing. So if you want to go for the power fantasy type of gameplay, Warhammer is gonna give you that, especially if you like playing with magic and super powerful entities. If you want something a little bit more realistic and more grounded, then I would say the other Total War games are gonna be better suited for your taste. Personally, after spending a lot of time in Total War Warhammer 3, it really was a breath of fresh air to play Shogun 2. Some things which were starting to annoy me a little bit, or I was getting tired about Warhammer 3, I did not have here, which to me was a major benefit. So I'll start with the main one, which is in terms of your armies and leading your armies. In Warhammer, if you want to lead an army, you need to have a lord leading that army. In Shogun, you don't need to have, a general. General would be the equivalent of a lord in Warhammer. So this right here is a general. This is the leader of my clan, it's the daimyo. I have him in my army because having a general will give you buffs to your army. Let me actually see if I can see them here. Because generals will have a skill tree, much like you would have, for example, a lord in Warhammer. Although it is more simplistic, I will concede that it's much more simplistic what you have here, which can also be a benefit if you don't want to spend a lot of time looking at skill trees. So you do have benefits from playing with generals in your army, but you don't need to have them. I have an example over here of an army that does not have a general. It's weaker because of it, but you can do it. On that same note, you can also have multiple generals in any given army. I did not find a lot of benefit to that. I think having one is exactly what you want and need, but if you want more, you can have more. In the very early stages of the game, I was actually playing with 2 generals because I had access to 2, and simply having one more unit is going to help out, in defeating your enemy in battle. Other than that, still on the topic of lords and generals, one thing that I sometimes get a little bit tired of in Warhammer is having to deal with lords and heroes in general. Especially certain factions will have lords or heroes which are stupid powerful, like stupid overpowered in comparison to anything else. It is not uncommon in Warhammer for you to have a lord that can solo entire enemy units, or even to a certain degree, and depending on the faction, you can even solo an entire enemy army with just one lord. If you want to go for the power fantasy and all that, sure, it can be cool. Having super powerful lords and heroes does open up a lot of strategic elements to the gameplay as well. I'll just give a very basic example that I use all the time. You can use a lord or a hero to engage with enemy infantry, make them blob up around your lord or your hero, and then you can just decimate them with artillery or with ranged firepower. Because your lord will basically take no damage from that, but the enemy entities are going to die very, very quickly to such a thing. Or even magic. You can just clump up a bunch of enemy infantry and then just devastate them all with powerful AoE effects. So that's fun, that's cool, but at the same time, it's not very realistic. I mean, looking for realism in Warhammer isn't really what you should be doing, but still, I don't like the fact that sometimes I'm fighting an enemy army and I can deal with the entire enemy army quite well, but then I have to spend 10 minutes trying to kill the goddamn lord which just refuses to die. If you've played against dwarfs, especially the slayers, and you've met Ungrim, you know what I'm talking about. If you've played against the vampire counts and you've faced Vlad, similar thing. Or even Scarbrand, although that one dies a little bit faster because it's quite huge. I don't want to get too deep into that, but yeah, it does get a little bit tiring to have to deal with that all the time, and it's just not very fun to me after so many hours in that game. In Shogun 2, however, your general is just a man. He is a well-trained man, he is proficient in combat, maybe better than your other units, but he will still die just as easily as any other unit in your army. If you position your general in an awkward position in combat, he will die. So in this game, I actually want to keep my general towards the back of the line, because I want him for his passive abilities. I want him for his bonuses to leadership and morale. And eventually, I can also use him in combat, but I would mostly use him to flank or attack a specific unit in a safe manner. You don't want to be reckless with your general. So that to me is a major benefit. It also opens up new strategy, because you need to worry about your general, which can be an interesting thing to do in combat. And if you are able to outmaneuver the enemy army and, catch the enemy general off guard or snipe him, it's going to be a massive penalty to the enemy army. Because something that's also kind of different in this game compared to Warhammer is that morale plays a much bigger role in this game than in Warhammer, I find. So if we look over here, we can see the morale stat, which we have, I think, in pretty much all Total War games. And what this means is, if your units receive a lot of penalties to their morale, they will just give up on the fight and run away. They will rout. And while in Warhammer you can have fights become very long, and they can drag out with infantry just grinding against each other, just killing themselves over a long period of time, until the point where they either completely die out or they rout with very few units. In Shogun 2, it was actually quite frequent for me to win a battle and the entire enemy army was still over like 50% of units alive. They simply just gave up on the fight and ran away. So morale is a very big deal in this game, and killing the enemy general is a big part of winning the morale fight. On that same note, if yours dies, it can also be a big problem. But yeah, I do love having weaker generals and not super powerful ones. I think it's more fun, and more engaging in terms of the gameplay. Another big difference between Warhammer and this game is the element of naval warfare. I will go into some more details about naval warfare when we go into the pros and cons of Shogun 2, but just know that in this game, you can maneuver your armies through the sea by placing them aboard ships, and you can do a naval invasion on another island, for example. You can do a similar thing in Warhammer where you move your armies over the sea, you even have the boat icon, but in that game you don't actually have naval warfare. If you engage in battle in the sea, it's still army versus army on an island. In Shogun 2, you actually engage on ship versus ship battle. You might have your own fleet, the enemy will have its own fleet with different ships, different abilities, and you engage in a different type of battle. Something else to note, comparing again Warhammer to Shogun 2, I do find that Warhammer is much better for replayability and diversity, but I really think that that's the main and the best strength of Total War Warhammer, so it's kind of hard to argue that one on my personal experience, because in Warhammer, like I said, you can play with humans, you can play with elves, you can play with dwarves, warriors of chaos, demons, whatever, and every faction has its own unique mechanics. That's really the main thing which surprised me about the game and made me love it even more. And you just have a different experience every time you play with a different faction. Or even just a different lord in the same faction. The mechanics are different. In Shogun 2, you have a couple of different clans you can pick from. They may have their own abilities like we saw before. Like my clan has a couple of buffs to ranged infantry and more increased income from farms. But, you know, overall, I'm still going to be playing with spearmen and archers and cavalry, just like any other clan will. There might be some unique units, but overall, the majority of the experience is not going to feel that different. I still think there is enough of a difference and enough motivation for the player to want to play with other clans. I want to play with other clans. I want to experience them all, basically. I'll give an example. I really want to do another campaign with the Oda clan because they buff one of my favorite units in the game, and they even have a unique version of it. I really want to play with the Atori clan because they're more based on stealth and bandits, which seems cool. And even the position where they start does make for a different experience. So in my case, with Chosokabe, I start on kind of an isolated island, right? So I'm not surrounded by enemies. If I start, let's say, over here, for example, I have a lot of people around me, which would mean a much different experience in the way I expand. So there is still enough motivation and enough interest to try out different clans and play the game in different ways. So I do think the game has enough of that, but it does not compare to the Warhammer series. What else? The pacing of the game. Shogun 2 requires a slower pace when playing the game. You can still beat the game by being very aggressive, I think, but I do think the game incentivizes having or taking a slower pace. And there are a couple of reasons for that, and I'll get into some more details about at least one of them in a bit. One of them is, and let's ignore how hostile this screen right now looks, but if you look over here at my bonuses and penalties, you will see the first one says territorial expansion. And what that means is, every time you expand your territory and you capture more settlements, you are going to receive a penalty in every diplomatic relationship you have with every other clan in the game. So, in Warhammer, I find that the game incentivizes being hyper-aggressive. You don't want to stop in Warhammer, you want to keep going. As long as your army is capable of continuing and beating enemy armies and capturing settlements, you don't want to stop. You want to keep killing, you want to keep capturing settlements and expand further and further. And there are multiple reasons for that. You gain gold and experience from beating enemy armies in combat. You gain more gold from taking settlements, plus the strategic element of having more territory. And you don't really have a lot of penalties for moving quickly. But here, if you try to go for a hyper-aggressive strategy, which I did, and that's what made me fail or give up on my first campaign, was I expanded like I do in Warhammer. I started accruing a lot of territorial expense penalty, which I wasn't even aware of, and I started noticing that everybody around me was starting to become hostile. So I started getting a lot of war declarations out of nowhere, started getting surrounded, and I just did not enjoy that part of the campaign, so I kind of just gave up and went for a new try. But yeah, if you expand too quickly, that penalty keeps going up, 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 and you're gonna start making enemies all over the place. The only way that I know to make this territorial expense penalty go down is if you stop for a while and you don't capture more settlements for a period of time. So essentially what that means is, in my opinion, the best way to expand in this game is capture a couple of settlements, as you would normally do, but then stop. Develop your infrastructure, spend some time gaining some money, building new buildings, improving your buildings, maybe improving your army, whatever you may want to do, and only after that's done, move on to a new expansion portion of the campaign. If you move too quickly, that penalty is going to become a problem. The other reason why you want to take, in my opinion, a slower pace while playing this game is Realm Divide, which is also a big change from playing Warhammer and coming to Shogun 2. So let's talk about what Realm Divide is. You'll notice right here in my clan, I have this fame meter, which right now is full. I am at legendary fame. You start at 0, you have an empty bar. Fame goes up every time you win a victory, or especially when you capture new settlements. It's mostly about capturing new settlements. I found that winning fights didn't move this too much. Regardless, when you capture new settlements or win fights, your fame goes up. When your fame reaches legendary, which means the bar is full, it triggers a Realm Divide event. And what Realm Divide does is, the current Shogun, the Shogunate faction, will rally every other clan in the game, not in the area, in the game, to turn against you and fight you as an oppressive force in Japan. So, at least in my experience, what this meant was, when Realm Divide triggered, every other clan in the game declared war on me. So if you look at our diplomacy screen over here, it's a good example of that. So like I said, everything in white in this case is mine, everything in red is hostile. Every other clan in the game is hostile towards me, and they are all at war with me. Not only that, they're all allied among themselves. So it's not like they're, engaging in war between themselves and keeping occupied. No, they all turn against you. From what I read online, you have ways of making diplomacy work in your favor even through Realm Divide, but it's not easy. Because if you also look once again at my bonuses and penalties, the third one right there you will see is Realm Divide. And I have currently a 160 penalty to my diplomatic relationship with this clan and pretty much every other clan. That penalty is not static, it keeps increasing. So even if you have powerful allies or very good relationships with other clans, if enough time goes by, everybody will eventually turn against you and declare war on you. Which means you have a much different dynamic to the approach you have to take in this campaign. You cannot just, work towards your victory conditions at your own pace and capturing it whichever way you want, because eventually you are going to hit Realm Divide and it's going to change things for you significantly. I think that can be an engaging and challenging experience, or it can also be kind of detrimental if you don't enjoy that aspect of the game. Like I said, In Warhammer, for example, I like to do my campaign expanding territory, but also making a lot of allies along the way. I like having friends and diplomatic allies throughout the campaign. And in Shogun 2, reaching a point where the game just says, okay, whatever diplomacy you had doesn't matter. Everybody's gonna turn against you all of a sudden. You know, I didn't mind it too much because it was different and I kind of enjoyed the challenge. But since it happens every single time on every single campaign, maybe it's not gonna be the best thing ever. It really depends on what you like to do. And finally, I want to mention another thing about, you know, comparing Warhammer and Shogun 2. It's about quality of life features and UI. So naturally, this is an older game. The UI is different, the way you interact with the game is different. A lot of it is still familiar, but there are still differences. And for example, the main thing that I had to get accustomed to was the lack of the alt and drag functionality that I have in more modern Total War games, such as Warhammer. And what I mean by that is, when you are in combat and you have your units spread out in a given formation, you can just select them all, you press Alt, and you drag, and you will move the entire formation anywhere you want. That does not exist in this game. There is a... I'm not gonna say similar, but kind of similar feature where you can move them forward or backward. It's not the same thing, and it does take a while to get accustomed to that. There are other things like you cannot make groups with single units. You have to have more than one unit to make a group, which is kind of annoying, because I would like to have my general, for example, on a group. I can't because it's a single one. And just overall a couple of things over there which, you know, it's an older game, it doesn't have as many improvements as the modern ones, but I would say overall there's nothing that's gonna make me not want to play the game because of that. It's just kind of a shame that I don't have those features. With that said, I have come to the point of the video where I am done, at least for the most part, focusing on comparing this game to Warhammer. Let's just move now to what I think about the game, the bad things about the game, and the good things about the game. I believe there are two main things about this game which I consider to be negatives. The first one is diplomacy. Now, as I mentioned, this is not the way you see diplomacy on your screen when you start the campaign. Okay, you're gonna find neutral people, friendly people, hostile people all over the place. This is what happens after Realm Divide. But like in any other Total War game, you have diplomacy. So you can negotiate peace, you can engage in trade with another clan, you can have military access, you can exchange hostages for bonuses, you can even arrange a marriage for more diplomatic bonuses. You can make military alliances, you can break military alliances, you can join wars. There's a bunch of different things you can do, and I really enjoy the diplomacy aspect of Total War games. And as I mentioned before, I like playing my games and my campaigns, making friends and allies along the way. However, I do find that diplomacy in Shogun 2 tends to be somewhat unreliable. And what I mean by this is, you can even see over here on the clans, they will have a temperament and they will also have integrity. This one, for example, is dependable. This one, for example, over here is questionable. This one is ambitious. This one is aggressive. So this would make me think, if this clan is dependable, if I make an agreement with them, they are unlikely to break that agreement. It even says right there, right? In reality, however, I had multiple situations in the game where I was very friendly with a clan. This clan is an example of it, actually. I was very friendly with them. I had a marriage with the clan. I had trade agreements with the clan. I had a bunch of things with that clan just to keep on building my relationship with them. And then, on a given turn, they just went hostile and declared war on me. And I don't like that. We can talk about that being realistic because people backstabbed each other at the time, blah blah blah. But, you know, it's a video game. If you are making a whole system around diplomacy and you are based on bonuses and penalties and whatnot, if I cannot rely on this system, then I start questioning what the point is of the entire diplomacy aspect of the game is, after all. So I don't like the fact that this is unreliable. A brief comparison once again to Warhammer. In Warhammer, if I look at my diplomacy screen and I see someone as very friendly, I know it is extremely unlikely that I need to worry about that faction. It is extremely unlikely they will just declare war on me. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very, very rare that that might happen. So I do find diplomacy there to be a lot more reliable than I do in Shogun 2. And I definitely don't like the change that this game applies to that. My second biggest negative on this game comes from naval warfare. Again, this is probably very subjective, but I will say that naval warfare is one of the biggest problems that I have with this game. It was the main issue that made me not want to do another campaign after my first successful one. I did not want to deal with naval warfare anymore. And I want to talk about this a little bit, because I think naval warfare can actually be engaging and fun. In the tutorial, I think we have like 2 fights with naval warfare where we get introduced to the whole naval warfare aspect. And I did like it. I like fighting in the open sea. It's a pretty setting. Again, like I said, the game has a certain charm and it's beautiful. I did like what I did there, and I do think that combat with naval warfare can be fun, but there are certain problems which make it a big issue for me. So first of all, even though it can be engaging and fun, it's also very clunky, it's very awkward, it is extremely slow, the ships move very, very slowly from one point to the other. I find that some mechanics don't work out too well, like you can board enemy ships, and I've seen my ships trying to board, they will just spend like 5 minutes circling around the enemy ship trying to find a position, which is just silly in my opinion, and it just becomes tiring after a while. But the biggest problem that naval warfare has, besides the clunkiness and slowness and repetitiveness, is the fact that the enemy AI, or the AI in general, loves to spam fleets. They spam fleet after fleet after fleet all over the place. Full stack fleets, fleets with a single ship or 2 ships. They will send in naval invasions with armies on board. They will raid your trading routes. They will try to kill off your ships, kill off your trade boats. It's just... it's so much, to the point where when I reached mid-game and especially late game, I found myself 90% of the time I was playing the game was engaging in naval warfare. And I got tired of it pretty quickly. We can even see it over here, I think. If you look at the records, this campaign lasted for 91 turns. And yeah, look at this. So land battles, I had 83 in total. And naval battles, I had 126. It's just too much. It's just way too much. The AI spams it all over the place, and you kinda have to deal with it. Because if you want to take care of certain things in the game, you need to engage in naval warfare. So I got to a point where I just gave up on having manual battles, unless it was like a crucial situation that I really needed to win that battle and save my fleet. Everything else, I auto-resolve. I don't care about naval warfare at all. If I can auto-resolve it, even if I take some casualties, I will. I don't care. I will just auto-resolve everything. But while I did not have, you know, numerous and powerful fleets, I had to engage in those battles manually, because if you are playing on higher difficulties, the game will apply a penalty in auto-resolve and combat in general, which means even if you have an equal force to the enemy, you will lose the battle. And if you are outnumbered or if you have inferior units, same thing. So you kind of have to rely on beating the fight manually if you want to ensure the best results. So yeah, I got tired of that, and eventually I come up with a way to just get a bunch of fleets all over the place and auto-resolve everything. I can tell you how I did that once we get into the campaign overview. But yeah, I think diplomacy, being unreliable, and the naval warfare element of the game are my two biggest issues with Shogun 2. Other than that, I have a subjective one. I mentioned before, realm divide and the slower pace. It's not really a bad thing. It depends on what you want, right? If you want to enjoy a slower pace campaign, which I know some people like, and I liked it as well, then it's a good thing. If you only enjoy a faster, more aggressive style of gameplay, like you have in Warhammer, then you might find this one to be a little bit too slow. But again, I wouldn't say this is a bad thing. It's really very subjective. I liked it personally. The other thing I don't like, but it's not a big issue, is in terms of building your settlements. The way buildings work in this game, first of all, the UI is kinda sucky, because you have to right-click and open up a wiki so you can see how buildings progress, and then you have to kind of click and see what it leads. It's a little bit too complicated, especially compared to what I'm used to in Warhammer, which is just a clearer UI. But the main problem I have with it is that you are really not incentivized, or you don't want to build tall, which is counterintuitive in my opinion, because you can develop your buildings and make them better. You can make them stronger, give you more bonuses, yada yada yada, but overall you don't want to do that, because if you want to improve your buildings, it's going to cost you food, because food is a mechanic in this game as well, which you can get from farms. As an example over here, this stronghold, this town, consumes 2 units of food. If I want to upgrade it, it consumes 3. If I look at something else, like for example, a market, this one consumes nothing, but if I upgrade it, it now consumes 1 food. And food is not that plentiful that you can just do whatever you want, right? So you might be incentivized, or you might think that you want to improve all of your settlements, because if you improve, for example, from a stronghold into a fortress, you have a stronger defensive position in case you get attacked. So it would be beneficial to get that. Also, if you improve your town, you get more building slots. So it seems like you want to do that. But if you start doing that all over the place, your food will start dwindling, and that can have very negative aspects. One of them is, if you have food surplus, like I have right now, this contributes to your town growth. So over time, your town will do better, will pay you more money in taxes, the more it grows. So it's beneficial to have a good amount of food surplus. Also, if you run into negative food, you are going to have public order issues, and you will not be able to build better buildings either. So what I found was it's better to just leave the majority of your settlements on the basic level where you capture them, and only improve a specific subset of settlements. If you find that one is more likely to be attacked, for example, do that. If you have a settlement that might have improvements, like for example the armorer or the smithy, that will make better infantry units being recruited here, you might want to develop this more, so you can get more military buildings in this spot. But other than that, just leaving everything on the basic level, I found to be the best way to do it, which is something that I don't really enjoy. I would much prefer if food did not restrict my gameplay in such a way. Okay, so that's the negatives out of the way, which, considering I think it's not a lot about the game, let's now go into the good things about the game. So first of all, like I mentioned, personally, I enjoy this time period. I like playing this type of warfare, you know, with spears and swords and bows and cavalry. I enjoy that time period. I like the fact that it's set in Japan. I like the culture of Japan. It's not like I'm a big consumer of, for example, anime or whatever you might think. That's not the case. But I do like the Japanese culture and the overall style of what we can see in this Japanese type of artwork and style. I like all of that. So for me, the setting is a big positive. The campaign map, as I mentioned before, is also a nice thing, in my opinion. I like the fact that we're playing with islands. I like the strategic element of, you know, having islands isolated from the mainland that can give you an advantage. The way you invade and expand into other islands also has its own way of approaching it, which is also different and, in my opinion, enjoyable. And overall, it's a good looking map to look at. Like I said, even the Fog of War, I like looking at it. I think it's really cool. Something else about the game is, I think, the voice lines. Your different units, they don't actually speak here, sadly, but in combat, you are gonna have voice lines like you do in Warhammer. And they are very, very cool. They're very, very good. Even just saying the name of the unit sounds cool. Like we have the Yari-Yashigaru here. Yari-Yashigaru. It might sound stupid, I know, but I just love saying that name. It's really cool. They have really fun voice lines. I think it just makes the overall experience playing the campaign map and playing the actual combat just a whole lot better. So I do like that a lot. Another element which I find enjoyable and more interesting in Shogun 2 than I do, for example, in Warhammer, is siege battles. So, siege battles in Warhammer, a lot of the time, they're kind of trivial. At least in my experience, they can be kind of trivial. Depending, once again, on which faction you are playing, but they can be kind of trivial. A lot of the time, I find that if there is a particularly nasty army in a walled settlement, which means fighting them in a siege battle, it's easier to kill that army off than if they were in open field battle. So I do think sieges in Warhammer are kind of, I don't want to say stupid, but I don't like them very much. Okay, they just like fighting on the walls, putting archers on the walls, more often than not, is detrimental to you. It doesn't make sense to me that that's the case. So I don't like sieges there. And in Shogun 2, it's not the case at all. In Shogun 2, sieges are a real thing. If you want to attack an enemy settlement and the enemy has decent forces in that settlement and you have to fight a siege, it's gonna be hard. It's not easy to beat enemies which are defending in a walled settlement. You are gonna get murdered by archers on the battlements. You are gonna be climbing walls and people are gonna be dying, falling off the walls and getting engaged in battle as soon as they climb up. They have penalties to morale. You have towers shooting you. It's really not trivial to beat sieges, at least in my experience. On the other hand, defending a siege battle is a lot more interesting. And if you are getting attacked and you can defend in a siege battle, it makes for an interesting and very powerful position. I even uploaded a video some time ago, me with a basic army of, you know, the basic units fighting off against 3 full stacks of enemy higher tier units. And I'm able to beat that. And it was very fun. I can even leave a link up here again if I don't forget, in case you guys want to check it out. But I do think sieges are a very interesting aspect of this game, and it felt very unique compared to what I was used to in Warhammer. So sieges, I think, can be very fun. On the other hand, they can also be quite hard, and I know some people might not enjoy, you know, offensive sieges at least. Now, moving on into army composition and units. There's a lot to say about this, I find. And I will start with the units themselves. The first thing I want to mention is I like the combat flow of this game a lot better than I do in Warhammer. I think that combat, battles in general in Shogun 2 are faster. You can finish the battles faster than I can, for example, in Warhammer. Units are not super powerful or super tanky. They will die rapidly when in battle. Not only that, the army composition also plays a big role in that, because I saw it described online, some people talking about combat here in units as kind of like a rock, paper, scissors type of mechanic. And I do agree with that, because you have something like, for example, spear units. And spear units are, historically, good against cavalry. And it doesn't matter if you have the most basic spear unit in the game and you are fighting off against the most powerful cavalry in the game. The cavalry is going to be in trouble. They are going to take heavy casualties. If you send, for example, a general straight in a charge against a spear unit, the general will die. So I like that fact. At the same time, if you have spears engaged versus katanas, they will lose. They're also vulnerable to missile units. They're also vulnerable to being flanked by cavalry also. On the other hand, missile units, archers, are very powerful against enemy infantry and also enemy cavalry, but if they are caught in melee, they are dead. Cavalry, as well, can be devastating if they are flanking an enemy. If you know the hammer and anvil tactic, where you kind of hold the enemy infantry in place with your own infantry, and then you flank around with the horses and smash against their backline in a charge, it's devastating. The morale penalty that enemies get can most often just make them rout from the battle. It is very, very powerful. So I do think there is a lot more strategy in how you deploy your units and your type of units in combat than you do, again, in Warhammer. I find that in Warhammer, as long as the unit is of a higher tier, it will commonly do better than lower tier units, even if they should be good against that type of unit, like, for example, cavalry versus spears. In this game, however, like I said, it's not the case. Even the most basic units are going to do well against what they are good against. For example, cavalry and spears, it works out very well in that sense. There's more strategy to how you deploy your armies. And you can be outnumbered, you can have an inferior army in terms of unit tier, and you can still beat the fight if you use your units in a smart way. And I do enjoy that quite a bit in Shogun 2. I also like, and it's partly due to what I just said, I like the fact that basic units are useful the entire game. We're seeing over here, this is probably like my main army. This is my daimyo, the leader of the clan. This is probably my main army, and as you can see over here, it's composed of basic units. I have Yari Ashigaru, I have Bo Ashigaru, I have some Yari cavalry and some samurai, but it's not the bulk of the army, right? I mostly have Ashigaru units. And Ashigaru, I believe, even stands for peasant. It's like kind of like peasant infantry. So this is something you can recruit even if you don't have military buildings. You can just recruit these anywhere you want. And they're very cheap, they're very cost effective, and like I said, they're still useful at the end of the game. This is end of the campaign, and I use these units to great effect all the time. Naturally, you can get better units which can perform better, but it's good to me, it's a positive, that even the basic units will have their place in combat even late in the game. Another thing to mention about the units here is that I find that most of them have fun abilities. They're not just someone that you send in to engage in battle and leave them there. For example, I have the Yari Ashigaru, which have spears, and they have an ability, which is actually a quite well-known ability in this game, which is the Yari Wall, where they basically form a wall of spears, which can be terrifying and devastating against anybody charging against them, making it for a very, very good defensive position. I gave the example before of cavalry. If you have enemy cavalry charging into a Yari wall, they're gonna die. Even infantry charging against a Yari wall will have a very tough time dealing with them, even with them being the most basic units. You also have your archers, which can shoot fire arrows, which can set things on fire. It can apply a penalty to morale, which is also quite fun. You have cavalry, which can go into a wedge formation. Your general also has a bunch of abilities. So I do like that even the basic units have some kind of ability to make them more interesting to use in battle. Okay, I had to drink some water there. I guess something else I wanted to mention that I did not have in my notes here is the agents. So agents, if we think about, again, Warhammer, these would be the heroes in Warhammer. You can recruit agents in this game. They don't even have an upkeep, which I find interesting. And agents, you can use them throughout the campaign map to perform a variety of actions. You can scout with them, obviously, which is very useful. You can, like for example with the ninja, you can sabotage buildings, you can sabotage enemy armies, you can assassinate generals, you can put them in cities and give them a bonus in detection of enemy agents. You can put them in an army for a passive bonus as well. However, they do not play a role in actual combat. If you engage in a land battle, these agents will not appear in the battle, unlike what we have in Warhammer. Personally, I kind of like that, because again, it's a single ninja. If I think about a single ninja in a battlefield, it's not really suited to be there, I think. Much in the same way as the magistrates or the Metsuke in the game, or the monks. So, with that said, I found myself using agents a lot more in this game than I do in Warhammer, because in Warhammer, with the benefits and the buffs they give the army, plus the fact they are powerful combatants in the actual battles, I tend to stick them in an army and just keep them in the army. I will really only use heroes in the campaign map later in the game or early to scout, but not for much else. So I do like, I did enjoy having more action with my agents throughout this campaign. So, with that said, these are what I think are the main comparisons, you know, between Warhammer and Shogun 2. The bad things about the game that I personally found, as well as the good things about the game. And I can definitely say it is a very solid Total War game. I really enjoyed my time with it, and I definitely want to return to it after exploring some other Total War games, because I definitely want to explore other clans, other campaign mechanics, and starting in different positions for more fun with this game. Really solid. I can definitely understand why people give it such a high praise, even with some of the negatives. With that said, and at the end of this video, I am just gonna give a brief overview of my campaign, because like I said, I like talking about these games and I like talking about how the campaign went. So, like I said, we started over here in Tosa. We began with the Chosokabe clan. And after 2 failed attempts, where the first one failed because I expanded too aggressively, so my territorial expense penalty got too high, I started getting enemies all over the place, which I did not enjoy. I abandoned that campaign. And I also didn't really know how to use my buildings. I ran out of food. I was not making enough money. It was kind of a mess. So my second attempt at the campaign actually got killed because of Realm Divide. I did not know about Realm Divide. So what I did was, if you look at the victory conditions over here, we need to become Shogun by capturing and holding Kyoto. And Kyoto is over here. as well as capturing and holding 25 provinces, including a specific set of them. So we have 7 specific ones: Awa, Awaji, Iyo, Sanuki, Tsetsu, Tosa, and Kyoto. And we have to do it before the year 1575. So what I thought was, since Kyoto is over here, and the 7 specific settlements or the provinces are all around this area, it's basically this island and the little bit of what's over here, I thought to myself, okay, I'm gonna do this like I do it in Warhammer, which is, since I'm over here, I don't have to worry about the south, because I have no enemies in the south. On the west, I have other clans, so what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna engage in diplomatic relationships with them, and try to make them my friends. So, I made trade agreements with the clans over here, I made marriage agreements with the clans over here, just to establish a strong diplomatic relationship in order to make them very friendly towards me and not likely for them to actually turn against me and declare war on me. So the strategy would be, I have this island, I have nobody on the south, the west are my friends, and I also have a friend over here, so I can just worry about this northern portion, and when I feel I have enough settlements, I am gonna move into Kyoto, capture it, and win the campaign. What happened in reality was, I took hold of this island for that particular plan, I made my agreements with the west, so these were my friends, I also made agreements over here, so these were also my friends, and I started conquering this area. I conquered enough that my fame reached, legendary status, so Realm Divide happened, and all of a sudden, all of my allies over here, all of my allies over there became hostile, declared war on me, and while before I was safe from 3 sides, I was now completely surrounded. Which, again, I wasn't aware of Realm Divide, I was like, what the hell is this? I just gave up on the campaign and went for a new one. I even had a vassal at the time, and even the vassal turned against me. So yeah, that was a failure as well. And then on my 3rd attempt, I went a little bit differently. So, I started over here, I took Iyo, I took Sanuki, and then even though we have friendly clans over here, there's a couple of reasons why we want to take the entire island. The first reason is, these guys have access to horses, which are very relevant in trade agreements in the game. People will give you a lot of money, and they will be very inclined to trade with you if you have horses for trade. So this was of strategic importance to my campaign. At the same time, if I was able to capture this entire island, I now had control of a whole island which is isolated from the rest of the mainland. Nobody can reach me except via a naval invasion. So, taking control of the entire island was also part of the plan. And then, instead of moving east or instead of moving north, what I did was, I tried to make, good relationships with the clans over here, and not engage in war with this north part of the map. So keeping these guys friendly or neutral, and instead I went for the western island. So I went over here. I actually started my invasion of the island through this area here, Satsuma, because it also has an armorer, which would make infantry recruited over here better. We have access to trade nodes, and these trade nodes are special because as long as you have trade ships on the trade nodes, it doesn't matter if you are trading with other clans in the game, because once Realm Divide hits, they will all break trade agreements with you, and you will lose all that money. These trade nodes are independent. As long as you have ships here, you will get income. So right now you can see over here I have 1,457 koku of income. If I move my ships, I lose 1,400 income. And the same thing applies to all of these yellow areas throughout the map. So coming for this island and getting control of this island would also give me access an easier way to defend these trade nodes. So I began conquering this island from the south, I pushed northwards, and I took control of the entire island. Naturally, I was doing this at a somewhat slow pace to not get a lot of territorial expense penalties. So I would capture a little bit, or I would defeat an enemy clan, and then I would stop, develop my infrastructure, and only then move on for the other settlements. So eventually, I was able to take control of the entire island. I was able to take control of the entire trade nodes on this area. And what this now meant was, I have control of this middle island, which nobody can reach by foot. I have control of the entire west island, which means I'm also independent here. Nobody's gonna attack me from the west. All I have to worry about now is the north and the east. And the good thing about this is, like I said, these are isolated islands. So people cannot really easily reach me unless they send in a naval invasion or they want to go through choke points by foot. So again, strategic importance of how I advance and capture these settlements here. Once I got the entire island, so I had this island and trade nodes, I stopped. I did not capture anything else to not trigger realm divide. I just kept on improving my economy, improving my armies, getting more income in preparation for realm divide, because you do want to prepare for realm divide. You don't want to hit realm divide, lose all your trade agreements, and then run out of money. You don't want that. So I prepared for it, and I also started building up my fleets. And I will explain the fleets in a second. Once I had enough income, enough armies, and enough fleets, I then started conquering this northern portion of the map, so this island over here. I had one army moving from the north, I had one army moving from the south, capturing everything. At this point, I began to go aggressive because I no longer cared about territorial expansion penalty, because we were in realm divide at the time. So just conquer north, conquer south, eventually converge around this area, which is convenient because at this time I had control over this entire part of the map. And with the armies converging over here, I had more than enough provinces to fulfill this requirement. I had all of my 7 specific provinces as well. So I took control of Kyoto with a couple of armies. I held it for 4 turns, which are basically 4 seasons, become the Shogun, and with that beat the campaign. I was kind of worried about defending Kyoto, but this here is a citadel, which is very, very easy to defend, actually, even with just what you have. Just what you have in terms of retainers. It's an easy place to defend. So I had my main army inside, I had my secondary army outside reinforcing. I think I even had like a third army around here somewhere. So any attempt to take this from me, I just killed off the invaders or the attackers, and I was able to keep this very easily for 4 turns. I even captured some more stuff over here just for fun. I had beat the campaign at this time. If we go over our records here, let me see. It's currently autumn 1567, but we actually beat the campaign here, campaign 1. So we beat it in summer of 1566, and everything after that was just, you know, for fun, just walking around, capturing settlements and all that, just because, basically. The other important factor about this, like I said, I was tired of naval warfare. What I did was, I built enough income to create a very sizable fleet. So, essentially I had 2 fleets on every choke point, and what I mean by choke point is, since we have control of this entire portion of the map, anyone wanting to... Actually, at the time I had control of this area here and this area here. So until this point, anybody wanting to come into my territory would need to go via a naval invasion. So everybody from this part of the map would have to come either from this side and then reach me over here, or they would have to come all the way from up here and engage or enter my territory through this area. So essentially, as long as you are able to have fleets holding these points, you see we have this area of control in red. Any enemy fleet wanting to pass this place needs to beat my fleet. So I had fleets on this choke point, I had fleets on this choke point, and I also had some backup fleets throughout this area in case anybody got through my initial fleets. And I would just kill them off with auto-resolve in case anybody was coming in from a naval invasion. So if they had armies on board those ships, both the ships and the armies would sink and I would kill them all in the naval invasions. So multiple fleets taking control of the choke points, nobody could invade my territory. And then, in case you are wondering about the enemies I had over here at the time, what you can also do in this game is, with your fleets, you can blockade enemy ports. If you blockade the enemy ports, the enemy cannot make use of them. So I blockaded every port in this area, which meant nobody could use ships in this entire region. And I had fleets holding off the choke points on the south and on the north. Eventually, once I started capturing more land over here, I started moving my fleets more and more over this area. So right now they're over here. And that way, in case anybody wants to go into my territory, they have to deal with my multiple fleets, which they were not able to, even just with auto-resolve. So yeah, that was the campaign experience here. I liked it. It was fun. It was a fun campaign. If we look at the records, like I said, it lasted 91 turns. We actually beat the campaign earlier, as we saw over here. I had some more turns just to have fun. We captured 39 provinces. We lost 5 provinces. We had in total 209 battles, 83 land battles, and then 126 naval battles. And then, you know, units recruited, units lost, destroyed, blah, blah, blah. Trying to see if there's anything here of, you know, noteworthy. We had some births in our family. We had a death as well. We earned 1,110,000 koku. 300,000 from trade. We got some from piracy and raiding, probably by accident. I didn't really raid or pirate that much. I didn't even loot anything. This was an honorable campaign. My general here, where is he? My general was always honorable. It also gives us some benefits in public order, so I just went for being honorable here. I looted no territory. We spent most of what we earned, most of it on upkeep, because like I said, I had a lot of fleets all over the place. Some on recruitment, some on construction, and just some stats here and there. In terms of technology, I think I focused mostly on archery technologies because, like I said, the Chosokabe clan is or has some bonuses for bow infantry, so I tried to capitalize on that. I didn't even really use artillery or gunpowder units at all. They come later in the game and they have some relationships with Christianity, which is a religion that my clan was not a part of. My clan is of the Shinto Buddhism religion. You can actually convert in this game if you want to, but I just kept loyal to my religion. And I think that was basically it. Yeah, so a cool campaign overall. Some cool mechanics. Like I said, I like the challenge and the strategy involved in preparing for the Realm Divide, which makes me go a different route than I would if Realm Divide did not exist. Like I said, if it didn't exist, I would probably not capture this entire island. I would not capture this entire island either. I would just take control of this, a little bit of that to make sure I had my 25 provinces, and then just move into Kyoto and beat the game. So yeah, it was enjoyable. I'm not sure if having every single campaign worrying about Realm Divide, if it's gonna be fun or if it might get a little bit repetitive, but we'll see once I play a little bit more of it. Overall, really cool game, exceptional Total War game, liked it a lot, definitely want to play it some more, and I can very easily recommend Total War Shogun 2 in case anybody is thinking about trying a Total War game, especially an historical game. It's a somewhat older game, but I can tell you the gameplay, the graphics, the artwork, the UI, I think they hold up pretty well into modern standards, even if we do miss out on some quality of life features from more modern Total War games. Really, really good game. So that's it for now, my friends. I want to thank you all for being here with me on the channel, watching, you know, this discussion over Total War Shogun 2. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Questions, suggestions, if you want to share your own thoughts about Total War Shogun 2 or how it compares to other Total War games, I would love to hear about it. Leave a comment below. If you are enjoying the content, consider subscribing for more. Many more videos coming out soon. It is also a free and easy way to support the channel. I hope to see you all in some other video, and until then, stay safe everyone.